Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session on day one of the Global First Responder Resilience Summit. My name is Katie Carlson, and I'm one of your co-hosts for this session. Today's theme is physical fitness and resilience, and I'm very excited to be here today with Amy Boudreau. Amy, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Katie. I'm really excited to be here, part of the summit.
Well, I'm going to begin by sharing some of your bio, and it goes without saying that you stay very busy. But to start, you have spent the last 10 years as a police constable and also as a writer, public speaker, yoga and mindfulness instructor who advocates for mental health and well-being for members of public safety as well as the general public. You're known as the Yoga Cop and use social media platforms to educate and inspire and spread awareness on wellness. And you're also a gravity yoga certified instructor. You hold corporate yoga certification, trauma sensitive yoga certification, mindful at work certification, and you use tension release exercises to help others in reaching a state of balance. And we'll talk about that a lot more in our interview. But in addition to all of that, you sit on several working groups to promote culture change and enhance overall well-being within the policing industry. That includes as a volunteer peer support team member, an ad hoc instructor for the mindfulness-based resiliency training police course, the wellness project manager for your police agency, and is part of the First Responders Mindfulness Network. So, Amy, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited about this interview, and let's just get started with the basics, all right? So how do you define trauma, and why is it important for first responders to understand how trauma may affect them?
Thanks, Katie. I think trauma is really important to look at when you're a first responder because we're exposed to that on a regular basis. So, some might ask, well, what is trauma? It's anything that really overwhelms our capacity to cope or respond. It can leave us feeling hopeless, helpless, and a lot of the times out of control. And as first responders, we really like to have control of a situation, and we also like to come up with solutions, and we want to fix things, right? So a lot of times with some of the trauma that we're exposed to, we don't necessarily have control over the outcomes, even though we do our best. So I also think it's important to understand, being exposed to that and what's happening to our bodies so that we can come up with practical ways that we can reverse maybe some of the exposure and the effects it has on our body. Just so people understand kind of like what type of trauma I might be talking about. There's two different types, really. One's like the big T, and the other's the small T. So some of the bigger stuff that obviously we're aware of is, going to, maybe a death call, maybe, different types of crimes that we see against children or sexual assaults, anything on frontline that we're going to be exposed to, unsavory people or a lot of stress responses, right? Because maybe people are argumentative or want to be combative with us. Again, and other types of things could be domestic violence, systemic racism and oppression, those types of things. And then some of the smaller ones, which, as first responders, we still are human beings and we have personal lives. And we also are dealing with some of those personal things too, right? So that could be possibly, non-threatening injuries. Maybe someone has an injury. Maybe their pet has just died. Possibly a separation or like a breakup, a significant loss in a relationship, financial, security if people are moving, anything that can add more stress to our lives and even like childhood, maybe experiences that are carried with us. So, we have our normal daily lives that stress and trauma, but then we also, as first responders, are being exposed a lot more than the general public. So understanding how our body responses and then countering those is really key to be healthy long-term in a 30-year career. If we don't, and we don't understand what's happening to our bodies, we can kind of spiral into negative health effects. So that could be either mental or physical. So you see a lot of like chronic diseases, illnesses, digestive issues, respiratory issues, inflammatory issues, all of our bodies, response to constantly being exposed to the stress response without being able to come back down to like an equilibrium. So I think it's really important, and which is why I'm trying to promote a lot of this work, because when I got hired, we weren't taught any of this information. And actually over the last 10 years, more so the last 5 years, because I've gone the first half of my career, the first 5 years, I actually experienced a lot of this myself. And then the second half, I really focused on doing some research and really wanted to understand, if we're going to last and be healthy in this job, what should we know and how can we counterbalance with some tools?
Well, you started to touch on it with, having a lack of learning and then, really beginning to teach yourself or figure it out for yourself. But what really brought you to the work of sharing these skills for processing trauma with first responders?
Yeah, so I'll just get into kind of what sparked me on this mission or this journey, if you will. Like I mentioned, the first five of my years on the front line, was challenging. People talked about shift work, they talked about the nature of the work, and it's like, yeah, okay, you hear it, but until you actually live it, then you don't really realize how it can start degrading your well-being long term. Like I mentioned, so I had like digestive issues, inflammation. I was averaging maybe 3 or 4 hours of sleep, working tons of overtime. The type of calls we were getting were very high risk. And so, the first thing that you stop doing when you're tired and you have lack of energy is your diet kind of goes off, your exercise regime goes off. So I started to spiral down into maybe being not so healthy. I looked like I was in shape, but I didn't feel healthy on the inside. And then even though I was practicing, not consistently, but I was already practicing yoga and some mindfulness exercises before I got into policing. But nothing could have really prepared me for what happened in 2015. One of my best friends, she was also an officer on my platoon, and she had 3 children at the time, and her middle child was 12, and she died in an ATV accident, which was horrific news. I ended up moving in with them for about 2 weeks to help support. And it was really challenging time in my life because, you're watching your friend experience something that's the worst time of her life. And trying to be supportive of that. And then also grieving the loss of somebody really close to me, like that was like a niece. So I went through that period, that 2 weeks, helped plan with the funeral arrangements, all that. But then I went back to work. And then there was a series of calls where I had all sorts of calls before, but I think because it was a compounding effect of dealing with something in your personal life and then coming back to work, and then having, certain calls that were similar or like were triggering. I had 3 calls that were back to back, that I guess added more grief to my already grieving process. And it was a 7-year-old had died from choking that I was first on scene to. The second one was a double fatal car accident where 2 young 20-year-olds had died in a collision, and it was one of the most gruesome ones I've been at. And then the third one was a Good Samaritan. He was trying to break up a road rage incident and got ran over. And then I did the death notification, and all these children are around the same age. So I wasn't, I guess, myself. I could feel a shift in me for about a 7-month period, and I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know why my body was responding a certain way. I didn't really know too much about all the different supports that were out there at the time. So what sparked me on understanding what was going on was the following year. I ended up traveling to Thailand for a month, and I learned everything to do with trauma and stress and what it does to the body. I was doing one-on-one sessions with different types of yoga, tension release exercises, which we'll get into in a minute. I went up into the mountains with some of the monks and learned all the different types of meditation, how it trains your mind and body differently. And what really sparked my interest was understanding the nervous system, and how to condition your nervous system to build resiliency. So once I learned that and really brought it home with me and started doing some of these practices, I wanted to extend what I've learned to other first responders. So I actually started to organize some meditation sessions at a local temple. We would run 2 8-week sessions a year in the spring and the fall. And that kind of continued my journey with really trying to understand the body more with the work, through trauma and stress. And then different tools, again, that we can use that are holistic, because the body is super smart. And when you give it the right conditions, it's able to heal itself. So again, it's everyone has to kind of pick and choose what's right for them. But I just want to give people more tools and more options to explore, to see, what might work for them. And these are some of the practices that I've discovered along the way.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that. And I'm sure that it was difficult then and still difficult to talk about now. But when it comes to addressing trauma and really addressing trauma in other public safety officials, you've got a bottom-up approach. What does that mean?
So a bottom-up approach. So a lot of people often will talk from a top-down approach. So we often talk about the mindset, changing your thoughts, changing the narratives that you tell yourself, your different belief systems. So from the mind, changing that aspect so that you change your body responses. Whereas the bottom-up approach is really just getting back into your body, feeling your sensations, and moving your body and changing your energetic state so that you're changing your mood and you're changing your mindset. So there's both approaches that you can do, but I think we often will focus on the mindfulness aspect as opposed to getting back into your body and just really shifting from that state. When you're exposed to trauma, actually a lot of parts of your brain shut down because it's very, very like high intensity stress. So some of the language centers will shut down. So even though talk therapy is good, sometimes it doesn't work for everybody. So what the others have found is that if you get back into your body, so some of the traumatic experiences remembered as through your senses and through pictures. And so when you get back into your body, it's almost like reverse engineering back to your equilibrium state through those movements. So again, these are just different options for people to explore to see kind of what works for them and to see what else is out there.
So along with this bottom-up approach, you've been incorporating a type of yoga into your practices that's called gravity yoga, something I hadn't heard of before meeting and talking to you. Can you explain what gravity yoga is and how it might help first responders?
Yeah, so I recently got certified in gravity yoga. So it was through the Yoga Teacher College. There's a guy overseas from Barcelona. His name's Lucas Rockwood, and he started up this gravity yoga approach. It's in 81 different countries. And the idea behind the gravity yoga is kind of like just letting gravity do the work. So oftentimes some of the stretches or yoga practices that are out there, they're more so for warming the body, moving the body, but it doesn't actually make significant changes in your flexibility or the structure of your muscles and tissues. And as we know, as first responders, I'm going to speak from my experience as a police officer, but we will wear all this equipment on our body, vest, our kit. We're sitting long hours, whether it's in a police cruiser or in front of a desk, a computer. And I just want to mention too, I know I'm speaking from a police officer point of view, but there's also secondary trauma. So that also, if you're working within the first responder industry, whether you're civilian or sworn, a lot of the stress will affect you the same way because it's kind of like vicarious trauma. You're reading reports, you're dealing with the same type of culture, so it can wear on and tear on you as well. So that's why it's important for everybody who's kind of in this profession. But yeah, so wearing the equipment, sitting for long hours, And, we're constantly in this position. And then obviously with our modern society, laptops, maybe some of us have been working from home because of COVID. We're constantly on our phones for hours. We're constantly in our vehicles driving to and from work as well, right? So a lot of our daily movements are very minimal. So what happens over time is we get very, very tight in the front of us and our hip flexors. Over time, we can get back issues, knee issues. Our bodies, our range of motions is not the same. And especially in these types of this line of work, we're expected to be fit, right? So a lot of us are lifting weights, or we're working out, or we're doing, CrossFit, or maybe you're cycling, or, all of these activities that we're doing to stay fit are also not benefiting our flexibility. It's actually making all of our muscles tighter. So the gravity yoga actually targets your hips, your back, your hamstrings. And what it does is it's mobility training. So it's targeted flexibility training, which is going to lengthen your muscle and change the shape of your fascia. So each of the poses have to be held for between 3 to 5 minutes, which doesn't sound like a lot, but actually it's super uncomfortable. So it's not the same as like regular yoga. You really have to hold these poses, and then you want to activate your breathing. So their 3 principles are, they say wet noodle. So you really like passive stretching, really relaxing, let gravity do the work. And then while you're in those poses, you're breathing 4-8, which means you're breathing in for 4, exhaling for 8, which is going to turn off your stretch reflex. It's kind of like a hack system so that you can actually go deeper into the pose to get those changes. And then each time you practice, you want to meet or beat your time, because that's what's really going to gain those long-term flexibility goals. So I just want to mention, because I know we were talking about stress and trauma. So how the gravity yoga works is, what I didn't realize, which I know now, is the majority of your ability to stretch and your resting tension of how your posture is and just everything about how you're in your body. 50% of that comes straight from your nervous system. So your ability to stretch and lengthen, some people say, oh, that hurts, I can't do this. And stress and our exposure to that actually changes our body. So when we're constantly being exposed to the stress, and, here we are, we're up really high, but we don't know how to come back down into an equilibrium. It just keeps, building. And we think this is our normal, right? How we're operating. Meanwhile, our baseline's down here, and we don't even know what that feels like anymore because, our muscles are so tight and our bodies change. So these practices will help get you back down to that equilibrium so that you can actually, your resting tension is more relaxed. You're aware of where maybe you're holding your posture, your stress in your body. So it's just very interesting when you understand the science, because then you can counter some of those things.
So when responding to threats, we often hear about going into fight, flight, or freeze modes. But you would add another category to that, faint and fidget. What is faint and fidget mode, and how can first responders learn how to navigate that?
Yeah, so your fight, flight, and freeze response is a natural, unconscious, primitive response in our bodies. We don't even think about it. It's just the same as how your heart beats or how you breathe. You don't think about those things. It just happens, right? So that's coming from our reptilian brain. It's through evolution. It's how it's kept us alive, right? If there's a threat in front of us. So oftentimes in the wild, when animals are exposed to a threat, so let's say, a deer and, something's tried to eat it. Oftentimes when they get away and they're like, oh my gosh, I almost just died there. My life was in danger. Their full trauma response, or like that full nervous system response, it usually is finished, and because it's a cycle, and it's completed by fainting, or they fake a death, and then they shake, which is the fidget. But as humans, we've got our logical brain as well, right? So as we're, maybe when we're kids, if you're upset or you're scared about something, your hands will shake. But as we get older, we turn off that response, or that we start to control our bodies a certain way because, that's not brave, right? If you gotta, if you're shaking or something like that, we really try to control our natural responses. especially as first responders, right? We're in a profession where we're seen as and being stoic. To a certain degree, we have to turn off some of those responses so that we can respond to the crisis and still do our job. But it's not effective after the call, right? When we're still holding on to that trauma or that experience. And oftentimes we don't really know how to release that. So it gets trapped in our bodies and it just stores within ourselves. So in order for us to reach an equilibrium, so what happens is when our body shakes, it resets our nervous system, and any type of deep chronic tension or stress is dissipated through our body. So when we shut that shaking down, which is called neurogenic tremors, we don't come back to an equilibrium. So anyway, there's different practices that are out there that you can safely, naturally invoke the shaking to help release some of the stored trauma and stress that maybe that's still in your body from some of these calls.
Well, that was a good lead into really our next topic of conversation, which is the tension release exercises. But before we really get into that, let's talk about why these exercises might bring up vulnerability in the people who practice them, and why it's important really to tap into our vulnerabilities in order to move through trauma using these exercises or otherwise.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the vulnerability piece, because even though I teach some mindfulness movement through different yogas, through our mindfulness-based resiliency training course, I never do these practices in the work environment because they are very vulnerable. And this is something that you want to do maybe in the privacy of your own home if you want to test it out. And I think the importance too of practicing these vulnerability, either poses or like exercises, first off is practicing to be vulnerable in your body. So it's you're practicing being in tune with maybe your feelings, or like feelings in the sense of like where you're feeling sensations in your body. A lot of the poses are very opening. So opening your chest, opening your heart center, opening so butterfly pose, your knees and those things. So when you're practicing through your body, then it's a little bit easier for you to open up later on, maybe to other people about talking about certain things. So it's a way to kind of practice on your own before maybe you muster up the courage to open up. And again, first responders often have difficulty seeking help or seeking support sometimes because they don't want to come off as being weak or being vulnerable in a certain way. But being vulnerable is very important. Like, that's why I share my story. I know as a first responder that there isn't one person who doesn't have a day where they have a call that's like, it sits with them a certain way, and as first responders, we have to recognize that we all have that. And so, it's not really fair to suffer in silence. I think that when we open up and are there for each other, we can normalize a lot of the adversities that we face in this job, because that's, a lot of people don't really experience some of the stuff that we do, right, on a daily basis. So another part of the vulnerability is your attitude. So it's kind of, how like we like to be in control all the time. So it's kind of just letting that go and just releasing yourself to the practice. So whether that's the yoga or the tension release practice, just being open to the possibility to see kind of like how your body responds, or just being in it. So more of like in the present moment, as opposed to just trying to control the pose or how it feels, just kind of releasing and just listening to your body and what it needs. So anyway, I like that you brought that up. Thanks for bringing that up.
I appreciate that you kind of, when we first spoke, went into this word of caution. This might make you uncomfortable doing these relations, and you can do them by yourself, and in the privacy of your home, because that's something that you would expect people to feel, is a level of discomfort with these exercises.
Yeah, and I feel like the more that you practice that vulnerability, the less awkward you'll feel in it or doing it or talking about it, So again, mindfulness, yoga, trauma sensitive yoga, like these types of things, are, I guess, newer. Like these interventions are a little bit newer for policing. And some might even say, like, what the heck does this have to do with policing? And when you're taking care of yourself, you're able to take care of other people better. And when you're practicing mindfulness and self-awareness, the way that you show up at work, for your team as a leader, let's say, or even just in the community, you're able to, up your performance because you're direct experiencing as opposed to being kind of distracted. So anyone who's, top athletes or, CEOs, and like a lot of people do practice these types of, mindfulness practices to up their game or level up. So just before we get into the tension release exercises, I just want to make a disclaimer that this is not anything that's going to take over any type of, like talk therapy, or if a clinician, or if you're with a clinician, to make sure that you run it by your clinician, to make sure that you're in a safe space mentally and physically to practice some of these, because it can be vulnerable and it can sometimes trigger maybe certain emotions or maybe events that you've been at. So you just want to make sure that you're doing it in a safely, and it's not a therapy that's to take over all the other therapies. It's just something to add to your tool to explore.
Well, great. Well, I'm so excited to learn more about these. Will you start to walk us through the tension release exercises?
Okay, so I'm just going to run through a couple of different exercises that can help release some of that stored trauma and stress in our bodies. And there's going to be 7 poses, and we'll just get started. So this is just a slide just explaining the top down approach and the bottom up approach that I was mentioning. And there's a few different examples of each listed there that you can look into if that's something that people are interested in. So just quickly, so people understand how these exercises work, we're going to be focusing and targeting the psoas muscles. So where they're located, it's back and behind the pelvis, and it attaches your back to your pelvis and to your legs. And this is considered the fight, flight, freeze muscles of the human species. So anytime we have that stress response, these muscles will intensely tighten up because it wants to protect your underbody and all your major organs. And it will stay in that state until it has that full cycle and that tremor release, which again, a lot of us aren't doing that tremor release because we've taught our bodies not to shake. And so what can happen is over time, like I mentioned, our bodies will start to change the way that they rest, and then our posture, etc. And that's where you can get back pain and all that other stuff. So the first thing that you want to do to start with exercise 1 is you're going to just roll from side to side on the bottom of your feet. You can see in the diagram there, and just creating a stretch on both sides of your ankles from side to side. As you're going from side to side, you want to make sure you're taking a slow, deep breath, and you want to count 5 reps for this exercise. So these exercises are in a sequence so that you're gradually tiring out the psoas muscles through these poses so that you can invoke the shaking response. So the second exercise is you're going to get a chair and you're going to put one foot up, and then you're going to raise your self up on your toes, and then you're going to lower yourself back down several times. So you're going to do that 15 reps on one leg, and then you're going to switch to the other side. You might feel a burning sensation. If you do, just shake your leg out and then just continue. For the third exercise, you're going to put both your hands on the ground and you're going to lift one of your legs up behind you. So while you're touching the ground, you're gently going to bend your standing knee and then you're going to straighten it. So you're going to do this on one side of the leg for 10 reps, and then you're going to switch to the other leg and do the same thing. Again, if your leg starts to burn a little bit, then just shake it out and continue with your reps. For the fourth exercise, you're going to stand with your legs apart so that there's some tension on the inner legs, on the muscles there. And then you're going to forward bend until you touch the ground in that second pose there. So you should feel the stretch when you come down in your inner thighs and then at the back of your legs. So continuing with, this is still exercise 4. So once you come down, you're going to slowly walk your hands over to one foot and then hold this position for a count of 3 slow breaths. Once that's completed, you do the other side and you're just going to repeat the 3 slow breaths. And then from there, you're going to come back to center. And you're going to bring your hands to the middle and then try to reach between your legs behind you. And then you're going to hold this position as well for 3 deep breaths. And then at this point, you might start to feel a little bit of shaking in your legs because you're starting to tire out that psoas muscle. So just allow that to happen. That's what we're trying to do. So to complete this exercise, you would just slowly come back up to the standing position when you started. So for the 5th exercise, you're going to make 2 fists, place them on the top of your buttocks, and then you're going to push your pelvis slightly forward so that there's a gentle bend in your back. So this is where you really want to feel the stretch in front of your thighs, in front of those hip flexors. Pretty much you're going to feel it through your psoas muscles as well. And then from gently, you're going to twist from the hips. So pick a side, and then you're going to try to look behind you in one direction, and then hold that for a breath. And then you're going to turn again from the hips and go to the opposite side and take a breath, and then come back to standing position. For the 6th exercise, you're going to sit with your back against the wall. And just kind of pretend you're sitting in a chair. If anyone's played any sports, you remember these. I used to hate them. So you're going to hold it as long as you can until you start really feeling that burn and maybe your legs start to shake. So once that happens, then you're going to come up the wall about 2 inches and then hold it again for a few minutes until you start to feel that burn and shaking. Once it burns, come up another 2 inches. And you want to get to a position on the wall where your legs are shaking, but you're not in pain. And you want to hold it there for 5 minutes. So after the 5 minutes is completed, then you want to hang over forward. And then you're going to hold that position with your hamstrings. Your knees are slightly bent, but you're trying to stretch out those hamstrings. And you're going to hold that between 3 to 4 minutes. So it's good to have maybe like a stopwatch or a timer with you for some of these poses. So for the last pose, this is where you really want, now you've burnt out the psoas as much as you can, and we're going to get into the more of the neurogenic tremors that you're invoking. So you're going to lay flat on your back, and then you're going to put your feet together and just let your knees fall open as wide as they can go in a relaxed position. And you're just going to hold that for 1 minute. From there, you're going to keep your feet the same, and then you're just going to raise your pelvis off the ground, approximately 3 inches or so. It doesn't have to be very, very much. And then you're going to keep your knees open, and you're going to hold this for 1 minute. So after this, you're probably going to start feeling your pelvis bouncing a little bit because your legs are shaking. From here, you're going to place your pelvis on the ground and relax with your knees open. You're going to hold that for 1 minute. And you're going to keep doing that for another 2 rounds. But every time you do another minute, you're going to close your knees just ever so slightly, maybe about 1 inch. So now you're really going to start to feel quivering because your muscles are really tired. And you want this to happen in a relaxed manner. So another thing too is once you keep holding that, your legs may start to quiver even more, like shake rapidly. Just allow that to happen. That's natural. And that's what we want. We want to feel that because it's sending signals up our nervous system to release and dissipate any deep chronic stress or trauma patterns that have been sitting in our body. And then for the last position, you're going to put your feet flat on the ground and then just keep your knees a little bit wider than your feet. And then you're going to hold that last round for 3 minutes. And that's pretty much it for the tension release exercises. Again, some of these poses are very vulnerable and opening. That's why you want to kind of do this on your own. And just be aware that sometimes this can also cause some emotional release. So sometimes people might cry a little bit afterwards, or it might trigger maybe a memory. Just allow that to pass and just know that it's temporary. And that's just your body's way of processing some of that out of your body. And that's it for the tension release exercises.
Wow, Amy, that was really neat. I, was in here wanting to kind of do it right now. I'm sure everybody kind of was as you presented it. So that's really interesting material. I can't wait to give that a try here soon. So thank you for presenting all of that. So you also have some other ways that first responders can, or anyone really can, access the parasympathetic nervous system, even while out in the field. Can you go through a couple of those?
Yeah, sure. The parasympathetic nervous system is key, really, when you're trying to activate your rest and digest. Really, it's the nervous system that really creates calm in our bodies. And when your stress response activated, it's the parasympathetic nervous system. It's the one that's unconscious. It's trying to get you away from the threat. So 3 things that you can do to really activate that. The first one is orient yourself. So these are really great too, because you can do this. You might have to be switched on at the call or whatever it is that you're engaging in. But then after the fact, you really want to do some of these practices to try to counterbalance some of those and get that calm state back into your body and your nervous system. So orienting yourself is key. One way that you can do this is actually by turning your head 180 degrees. So if you're turning your head all the way around and you're looking up, you're looking down, you're looking side to side, you're looking all behind you, what's happening is when you're moving your neck, it's stimulating the back of your brain, your brain stem cell, which is attached to that primal reptilian brain. And so what these 3 practices do, it bypasses your thinking mind, and it goes straight to your limbic system. It's orienting your 5 senses. So it's directly communicating with your limbic brain, telling it that your body is now in safety. So you can activate that through all your 5 senses. Again, you can just even notice, bring your awareness, your attention to your 5 senses. Like, what are you seeing, smelling, hearing at the time? That will help ground you as well, and really settle down your nervous system. So this you can do in your cruiser. You can do it when you get to a scene. If you think your body is reacting a certain way, or even if you're sitting at your desk and you have a meeting or a presentation that you're kind of nervous about, or you get that email, or you got that person that kind of just rubs you the wrong way. These are some practices that can also just kind of bring your body state down. The second one is grounding yourself. So this is just, you can bring awareness to feeling a certain part of your body, maybe paying attention to how your feet feel in your boots, like paying attention to your feet on the ground or in your cruiser, or in, for paramedics when you're driving in your ambulance, etc. Another thing is if you're at a call and you don't, bring awareness to your feet, let's say, you can even just touch the tips of your fingers with your thumb, and just bringing that awareness to the sensation will really ground you in the present moment. Again, you can do this anywhere. You don't have to, be out on a yoga mat somewhere or doing these tension release exercises. And the third one is our breath. So I know we talk often about taking deep breaths. I do it all the time when I'm on my way to a really high risk call, because I can feel my heart racing. I can't, your mind's going. You're trying to think, okay, what's this situation going to be when I get there? How many suspects? Where are the weapons, etc. So taking those really deep breaths will actually help bring your heart rate down. And, what you're trying to do is create, so you're not reacting when you get to the call, but you're responding. You're giving yourself that split second, because things happen really fast, split second to be able to optimally perform at your best. So the breath is really going to help that. And then another thing too is you really want to bring the breath down, because a lot of us actually stop breathing when we're stressed out or headed to a call, or we're breathing really shallow. So in order to activate the parasympathetic nervous system and also to engage the vagus nerve, which is a calming effect, you have to bring the breath down into your belly. It's called belly breathing. So you should really feel your belly come out and then go back in. You can do this even before you go to sleep to relax your body as well. If your mind's racing and you don't know how to turn off your body or your thoughts, that deep belly breathing is really what's going to do that. So you can do any of these three things anywhere, which is, if you're out in the field, just practice some of these things consciously, and they will make a huge difference and an impact in between your calls and how you're showing up at your calls as well.
Thank you for sharing that too. I think it's important too. A lot of these are directed towards public safety in your examples, but it's a lot of tips and material that could be available or accessible to anybody.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of these practices too, it's really really getting your body out of the fight, flight, or freeze state, because it's reorganizing your body's perception of danger through movement, through your senses. So just bringing a level of awareness to those practices daily. And for me, it's good to practice when you're at home and you've got time, which is great. But then sometimes we're training our bodies to be like, oh, there's a place to be calm and there's a place to be stressed. When I go to work, I got, or if I'm with my kids, or then you're stressed. So the key is to, yes, practice on your own time, but then you really want to be practicing in the stress, in the chaos. Some of these mindfulness practices, these other things you can bring to work with you. That's really, really where you need them, right? So.
And, as we begin to come to a close, I feel like that was a really good lead in because, it's not just about practicing at work or practicing at home, but it's about practicing in all of the different phases of our lives. And you also have some stuff to share about, really how to kind of utilize these practices or pay attention to first responders throughout the different phases of their careers, and how this might help and how to kind of pick and choose what you need at what stage.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I feel like sometimes it depends on where we're at in our career or what's going on in our personal lives, that when you hear this information, it will resonate with you. And, there's different mindfulness courses that I've taken several times. And every time I take new information away from it, because either I'm dealing with something at that time that I can relate to now that maybe I didn't before. So that's why having some of these practices in place are constantly educating yourself or exposing yourselves to different holistic practices, because you really need that mind, body, spiritual approach when you're in policing or in any first responder. And again, different aspects of your career will pose different things. You might, some early in someone's career, maybe there's like marriages or buying homes. You've got different family dynamics, maybe having kids. Sometimes people go through separations or divorces. Sometimes the job is wearing on you now because that you've actually been on the job for a certain amount of time. So really staying connected with your why and your purpose and the reason why you got into this profession in the first place. A lot of us want to help other people, right? And each other. So that's why it's really important to kind of figure out how to build resiliency over a long period of time. And you need a variety of different tools to be able to do that. There isn't one particular way that's going to, one thing that's going to solve or fix anything. So at the end of the day, it's up to the individual too to, you can be exposed to some of these practices, but you have to meet other people, halfway. You've got to want to do some of these or learn and take some ownership of your self-care and your health, right? One thing I wanted to mention is, which is another thing that people can do on a daily basis, because when we're constantly in this job and we're faced with a lot of negativity, we're faced with a lot of challenging times and in the worst possible situations of other people's lives too, right? Because no one calls 911, for anything positive, on a good day. It's usually because there's something serious going on. So when we're exposed to that all the time, it can really drain us, and it can lead to burnout, compassion fatigue, etc. So it's really important that we're really, they call it heart focused, or trying to bring in specific feelings to offset draining emotions. So there's parts of the brain where the stress hormone is produced and released. It's called cortisol. In the same part of the brain, there's another hormone that's released. I think it's DHEA. I can't remember what it's called offhand, but they're both created in the same center, so they can't be produced at the same time. So it's either the stress one or it's the positive one, right? So if you can practice drawing in more positive emotions. So some of these examples will be like ease, the feeling of tolerance, gratitude, appreciation, forgiveness, love, courage, dignity, integrity, honor, adventure, enjoyment. Any of these emotions, when you practice, what do those feel like? And just trying to switch some of the negative emotions or feelings that we get throughout the day because we're being exposed to these things. If you can counterbalance with that, you are really going to boost your resiliency. You're going to boost your energy reserves, because every time you're reacting, every time you have that emotional response, it's draining you. And then it's harder for you to bounce back when you're dealing with some of these stressful things, right? Whether it's at work or in our personal lives. So that's just another great way to kind of on a daily basis, just pay attention and really be intentional, because we're more prone towards the negative, right? Because that's what keeps us in survival mode. Like that's what protects us. So we really have to make a conscious effort to practice these other positive emotions and allow that to become our natural default state, not the reverse, right? And if you're not practicing some of these counterbalances, you're just going to be operating, thinking that's your normal default pattern, but it's really that stressful response that you haven't just come out of, right? So, yeah.
Well, you've shared so much really helpful, really practical information with us today. So I'm so grateful for that. Before we close, is there anything else that you'd really like to share with the people who are watching?
I guess maybe 3 takeaways, maybe from some of the content that we were talking about today that might be useful for people. Just from my personal experience, I thought that being healthy when I first got into policing was I'm eating right and I'm exercising. So I'm good, right? No, I found later on that you actually need to have additional practices for your mental health and for your nervous system, because we are being exposed to this. So if you're just focusing on diet and exercise alone, I wish you the best, but you need to probably look into some of these other alternative methods so that you can be fully holistic in your approach. And then I would say the second thing is there's no, we kind of touched on this, there's no one particular thing that's going to be right for you. So just as diet is different for everybody. So as an example, some people might have intolerances or allergies, or they have different likes and needs. It's the same thing when it comes to your holistic healing. You have to kind of figure out what's best for you. And you have to know yourself. You have to put the work in to understand what your needs are. And until you do that, you're not going to know what you need, right? And I guess the third thing would be that, so attention release exercises and some of these other yoga poses or mindfulness practices that invoke the parasympathetic nervous system are super beneficial. And they're all inclusive. So it doesn't matter what your age is. It doesn't matter what your fitness level is. It doesn't matter, anything. Your fitness and your health can happen at any age. It doesn't matter how long you've been on the job. So if you think, to too old for this, or I've been on the job for too long. Like I've got a lot of, years under my belt. Again, just be open-minded to some of these practices. You never know how it will help. And what we also want to make sure is that when people are retiring, that they're also fit and healthy from that aspect, because as we know, this job is go, 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 busy, busy, busy. And then you retire and then you're sitting with it in quiet and you're reflecting. And sometimes that's when things can come up. So you really want to have some type of practices in place before you get to that, so that you can also enjoy your retirement as well.
Well, thank you so much for being a part of this summit. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. And I think that this information is going to help a lot of people. So thanks for everything you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. And you all can give me a follow on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I'm the Yoga Cop. I don't have a website just yet, but I'm going to be sharing a lot more content to help people with some of these practices.